My answer is yes. And here is what I think we need to do. One, we must work extra hard to entrench democracy on the continent. We have 19 countries slated for presidential or general elections this year. How these elections go will have a huge bearing on how we proceed as a continent. Two, we must watch against the return of conflict and coups. We have had a civil war in Ethiopia, the humanitarian crisis in coups and jihadist uprisings in the Sahel, and conflicts in the Sudan and the DR Congo. We've seen the coup in Mali, Guinea, in Burkina Faso, Niger, in Gabon. Three, Africa could, but must not be caught again in proxy wars between foreign powers, as happened in the Cold War. Four, we must pay greater attention to the issues of poverty and sharing of opportunities, which are at the heart of the conflicts in Africa. Five, we are witnessing a new scramble for Africa. China, Turkey, India, and the Gulf nations are increasingly asserting their own influence around the continent. Russia is making a return. The US and Europe remain active. While we need to engage with the world, Africa must find ways to navigate all the new geopolitical interests that often put it to great disadvantage. Sixth and last, there is climate change that has serious environmental, economic, and security implications. Africa must adequately prepare for disruption of livelihoods, including food production, new diseases, and consequent social upheavals and civil strife. These are things we all know are going to happen, and we cannot just sit and wait for them to devastate us. We need to learn to prepare instead of merely preparing to respond. We must do this collectively as a continent to deal with critical issues that affect more than one country. Overall, I remain confident that the transformation of Africa is underway and will continue. I'm encouraged by the determination of young global citizens such as yourselves to change the future of the continent and the world. I encourage you to continue being creative, farsighted, and making demands of our leaders. Most of all, I encourage you to stretch your hands across borders and connect more with each other. Many of you are working on startups. I encourage you to look at what the cost of outsourcing to Africa would be. If each one of us tries just a little bit, it is that unified purpose that will finally bring about the African Renaissance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable. We'll sit and have a conversation because the questions are coming in. Keep the questions coming. Keep the questions coming. Honorable, thank you so much for that lovely talk. And just in terms of housekeeping, keep in mind not making any movements or going out while we're having this conversation. So if you can just hold on for a bit because we'll be going out very soon to take the photo. So we'll do it then. But Honorable, thank you so much again for the talk. I really love your point on Afro optimism. And we actually have a question for you. And it's saying, what advice can you give young Afro optimists working to change the narrative and overcome challenges of the hopeless continent stereotype? The questions that we have, Kennedy, and while he's jotting that down,
And you also mentioned about the influences in Africa. There's a question on China, and the question says, "What are your thoughts on the current Chinese influence in Kenya?"
yeah, those are great questions. So again, don't forget, you can just scan and then ask the questions and we'll read them from here. So yeah, we'll give it to you, Honorable, to try and answer those two questions before the other questions that have come through. So the first one was, what word of encouragement you give to the young Afro optimists?
Well, let's say I say that Afro-optimists are those who believe in the ability of African people to develop Africa, not that Africa is independent from the external world. First, we must have confidence in ourselves as a people, and we must not continue give excuses, because the usual common excuse is that, oh, we are poor because we are colonized. But I keep on saying that, yes, so what? India was also colonized. China, for a long time, colony of Japan. Malaysia was a colony. So colonialism is past. What do we do among ourselves now as African people? Where do we have to depend on other people? First, self-confidence, the ability and capability of African people, that we are not inferior to any people, and that we need to help each other. Help your fellow African brother and sister when they are in problems, and try to promote more working among yourselves as a people, as a continent. And don't discriminate on the basis of ethnicity. Tribalism is a major problem in African countries. Then it translates eventually to nepotism, where people offer opportunity more to people of their own tribes and so on. This itself actually it impedes growth and development, because they're not able to tap into the talent that we have as a people. So look at yourself as equal. And thirdly, the issue of gender equality is very important. We should discard the old traditions which tended to discriminate against the people of female gender. Give women equal respect and equal opportunities to serve like men. And also tap into the youth talent. Africa it has got what we call the youth bulge. It's the youngest continent in terms of population. The others, like now where we are in Europe, these are aging communities because they're not giving back. Africa is young, 70% of the African population below the age of 35. So you can actually have a kind of what we call demographic dividend by empowering the youth. If the youth is not empowered, they become delinquents, drug addicts, criminals in the dragon society. If they are empowered, then they become a potent force for growth and development. That's what China has done. So this is some of the advice I would give to Now to China. China, this is a question always, is always the elephant in the room. China. But I say China is not a threat to Africa. Chinese have managed to do a wonder or a miracle in the latter half of last century. When they opened up their society, but they had invested very heavily in manpower development. They had a fairly young and very skilled workforce. When they opened up the economy, most of the corporations from the Western world rushed to China. China became the factory of the world. China was making things different. Name all these corporations. They're in China. You have got the Ford Corporation, you have got the Mercedes, Nissan, Toyota, Peugeot, all these are manufacturing. In Japan, Germany, they tell you that it's cheaper to manufacture a Mercedes Benz in China and ship it back to Germany than the one that is manufactured in Stuttgart. Okay? So within that period of time, China managed to build the biggest middle class, 500 million people, moved from the lower class to the middle class. But because of that, China is no longer a cheaper destination for manufacturing because they have become more affluent. A gap that which Africa can fill. But China, it's true, China is interested in African raw materials. China wants iron ore, wants copper ore, wants bauxite, they want lithium, all these raw materials which are available in Africa for their industries. But Africa can actually also negotiate with China, negotiate on equal terms, so that we get our raw materials in exchange for ABCD. And what I've been saying is that nobody has prevented anybody else from coming to Africa. Nobody has prevented anybody from coming to Africa. Before China came in, we were there. African economies were dismissed as basically hopeless cases. We are basically hippies, highly indebted economies. So the US is welcome to UK. These are the countries which have African peers, they are colonial masters. Nobody has dismissed them. Africa should just trade with everybody on equal terms. Because China, in my view, is not a threat to Africa at all. China is with nobody. It's a partner like any other person. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Honorable. Unfortunately, we are pressed for time, so we will not go through all the questions. But there's one question that keeps coming up, and I think it would be wrong if we do not address it. During your talk, you mentioned that you are running for the position of AU chair. So maybe as your last words to us, how are you looking at integrating the continent? How do you intend to address the trade barriers that are currently existing? And if you were elected as AU chair, what would be your legacy?
Thank you. First, yes, I'm running for the position of chair of African Union Commission. But I've been actually requested by some of my friends, but also feel challenged having been a high representative of AU on infrastructure development. You know that the AU actually now established African continental free area trade, uh, which basically makes it possible and necessary for Africans to trade with itself. Africa, intra-African trade is very small. Inter-European trade stands at right now at 70%. Inter-Asian trade is at 50%. South America is standing at about 30%. But intra-African trade is at about 15%. Africa trade very little with itself. People will tell you that, oh, Africans don't trade with each other because they produce almost the same things. But you ask yourself, European countries produce almost the same things. How come they trade with each other? That is not the reason, that is the excuse. But having been the high representative of Africa on infrastructure, I understand. One of the impediments is non-tariff barriers to trade which have been imposed by just taking up the country. Secondly, is lack of infrastructure between these African countries. And this actually makes it difficult for African countries to trade. I'll give you an example. Kenya, between Kenya and the country called Central African Republic, there's only one country called South Sudan, between Kenya and Central African Republic. But there's no infrastructure. There's no highway, there's no railway that connects Kenya to Central African Republic. So if you want to send goods to Central African Republic from Kenya, you have to find a ship. You go down the Cape Coast, along the West African coast to Cameroon, and then by road into Central African Republic. The French are there ahead of you. And that's why they drink Kenyan tea in Bangi, called English breakfast tea. Okay. So you need to have infrastructure. At the AU, we're addressing the following: the intra-African highways, the Cape to Cairo. This is a project which was conceived by Cecil Rhodes, the home in whose honor we are sitting here today. Cecil Rhodes one who conceived the idea of Cape to Cairo over 100 years ago. And he said that he wanted to travel by road from Cape Town to Cairo. That was his dream. Up to today, it has not been realized. There are still gaps in between that highway from Cape to Cairo. Then there is the road from Tunis to the Cape. It was along the western coast. Then there is the Dakar to Djibouti, east, across the Sahel. Then the one Dakar to Lagos, then Lagos to Mombasa, east coast, and several South African highways. Then there is high-speed railway network. One of them is running from Lagos along the coast or western coast all the way to Cairo. Another one running from Beira, in Mozambique, to Walvis Bay in Namibia. Then another one, the Lamu Port, South Sudan, and the Cape Transport Corridor. As AU, we have extended it across the Central African Republic to the Cameroonian port of Krigi to create a land bridge that connects the Atlantic Ocean and Indian Ocean. It opened up the landlocked countries in the interior of the continent. Then we also talking about open skies. Right now, air transport is too expensive across the continent because each country has got its own air traffic control system. If you want to travel across the continent, you have to get so many licenses. I'll give you an example. Just 2 months ago, I went to the funeral of the late president of Namibia. We chartered an aircraft to fly from Nairobi to Windhoek. We had to spend 3 hours waiting at the airport for air traffic clearance, transit control, to get from the Tanzania airspace, DRC, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia. At the time, I was holed up in Dar es Salaam for 10 hours. I was flying to Niamey in Niger for a conference on a charter. You have to get the clearance over Uganda, over DRC, over the Central African Republic, Nigeria, and Cameroon, Nigeria, and Niger. So this is the thing. We're talking about creating an open skies so that you have one African air traffic control, just like you have in Europe. Yeah, that's one of the things. The other one is the fiber optic network connection, connecting all the African capitals to make it easier for communication and make ICT available to the population of Africa, as you say. The other one is the water transport and the blue economy. Here we're talking about river transport. Like we want to connect the Mediterranean along the Nile to Lake Victoria. The ships can move from Europe through the Nile all the way to Lake Victoria in Central Africa, also the Congo, making them navigable, so on and so forth. This is another area where we want to work. And this will make it easier for goods to move across the continent. What we are talking about is to make Africa first accessible, second, to be able to attract investments. We don't want Africa to continue as a supplier of raw materials. We want Africa to do value addition, the raw materials that it produces, so that it can be able to produce manufactured products. This will help create jobs within the continent. You see, it is a paradox that Africa, the richest continent on planet Earth, is also the poorest. This is a paradox that we want to change and to improve the living conditions of the people of Africa. And I keep on talking about the African land, the story of the African land, and I will end my the talk here with the story of the African land. The African land is talking to the Asian tiger and telling the Asian tiger that you have danced on the stage far too long alone. The European bear retreated long time to the poles, which is asleep. The American panther is also limping from the retreat. But I mean, I've been asleep in the jungles of Africa for long, but now I'm awake. I'm awake, and I'm here, bounded by the mountains, Kilimanjaro to the east, and Atlas to the west. the rivers, Nile, the Gambia, the Zambezi, the Limpopo, the Congo, and I am in the African forest. I'm sitting in the African gold, African bauxite, African iron ore, African diamonds. I will use my ability to transform all these raw materials into wealth and claim the 21st century as a truly African century. Blessed be the African land to Asian time. Thank you.
All right. All right.
Thank you so much.
All right. Honorable Odinga, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, your insights on Afro-optimism, your insights on Chinese influence and the importance for critical negotiations in Africa. But also thank you for running for the AU as well. And I wish you good luck in your candidacy. Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So we are running behind time. Like I mentioned earlier, we're using the doors at the back. So we're going up the stairs to the west lawn to take the photo. I would encourage the people sitting at the back to quickly start going out. We're using the doors at the exit. Yes, they've been opened. We're going up the stairs to the west lawn for the official photo. If we could do that promptly so that we're back for the next session.